Genesis chapter 29 verse 1. Then Jacob went on his journey, and came into the land of the people of the east. Context: Genesis chapter 29 is part of the narrative of Jacob's life. Previously, Jacob had fled from his brother Esau after deceiving him and taking their father Isaac's blessing meant for Esau. In Genesis chapter 28, Jacob had a significant encounter with God at Bethel, where he received a vision of a ladder reaching up to heaven. Now, in Genesis chapter 29, Jacob continues his journey. Jacob's journey. After leaving Bethel, Jacob travels to the land of the people of the east. This journey was a significant turning point in Jacob's life as he was leaving behind his family and venturing into unfamiliar territory. The land of the east is understood to be the region of Mesopotamia, where his mother Rebekah's brother Laban lived. The significance of the journey. Jacob's journey to the land of the people of the east holds several important implications. Firstly, it marked a step of obedience for Jacob. He was following his parents' instruction to find a wife from among their relatives, rather than marrying a Canaanite woman. Secondly, this journey was a part of God's plan for Jacob's life. God was orchestrating events to shape Jacob's character and fulfill his promises to him and his descendants. The fulfillment of God's promise. The events that transpire in the land of the people of the east lead to Jacob's marriage to Laban's daughters, Leah and Rachel. This union sets in motion the continuation of the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac. Jacob's descendants would become the 12 tribes of Israel, through whom God's plan for redemption and blessing would be carried forward. Lessons for us. Jacob's journey reminds us of the importance of obedience to God's leading and the significance of God's providence in our lives. It teaches us that even in times of uncertainty and unfamiliarity, God is at work, fulfilling his plans and purposes. It also serves as a reminder that God is faithful to his promises, and his faithfulness endures through generations. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 29 verse 1 marks a crucial point in Jacob's life as he embarks on a journey to the land of the people of the east. This journey sets the stage for God's continued work in Jacob's life, leading to the fulfillment of his promises. The passage encourages us to trust in God's guidance and recognize his faithfulness throughout our own journeys of life. Genesis chapter 29 verse 2. And he looked, and behold a well in the field, and, lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. This verse is part of the narrative describing Jacob's journey to Paddan Aram, where he would eventually meet his uncle Laban and marry his daughters Leah and Rachel. Let's delve into the details and explore some key themes and lessons we can derive from this verse. Guidance and provision. In this verse, Jacob comes across a well in the field. The presence of the well was not a coincidence, it was a provision from God. The well symbolizes God's guidance and provision for his people. Just as the well was a source of water for the flocks, God provides for our needs and leads us to the right places at the right time. This verse reminds us to trust in God's guidance and provision in our own lives. Hard work and diligence. The verse mentions that the shepherds watered their flocks from the well. This implies that they had to put in effort and work diligently to take care of the sheep entrusted to them. Similarly, in our own lives, we are called to be diligent and hard-working in whatever tasks or responsibilities we have been given. Whether it is our work, studies, or relationships, we should strive to do our best, being faithful stewards of what we have been entrusted with. Obstacles and persistence. The verse also mentions that a great stone was upon the well's mouth. This stone could have been an obstacle to accessing the water. Likewise, we often encounter obstacles and challenges in our lives that hinder our progress or access to resources. However, this verse reminds us of the importance of persistence and determination. Just as Jacob and the shepherds did not give up but found a way to remove the stone and access the water, we should persevere in the face of difficulties and seek creative solutions to overcome obstacles. Symbolism. It's worth noting that in biblical literature, wells often carry symbolic significance. They can represent a source of life, refreshment, and even spiritual nourishment. In this verse, The well serves as a meeting place for Jacob and his future wife Rachel. It foreshadows the important relationships and blessings that would emerge from this encounter. Similarly, in our lives, when we encounter opportunities or relationships that seem coincidental, we should be open to the possibility that God may be orchestrating something significant for us. Genesis chapter 29 verse 2, although a brief verse, offers valuable lessons about God's provision, the importance of hard work and perseverance, and the potential for divine encounters. It encourages us to trust in God's guidance and remain diligent in our pursuits while reminding us that obstacles can be overcome through persistence and creative problem-solving. Genesis chapter 29 verse 3, "And thither were all the flocks gathered. And they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place." This verse describes Jacob's arrival at a well in the land of Haran, where he encounters shepherds who have gathered with their flocks. It specifically mentions that they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, watered the sheep, and then put the stone back in its place. Let's explore the significance of this verse in its broader context. Seeking a wife. Genesis chapter 29 begins with Jacob's journey to his mother's family in Paddan Aram to find a wife among his relatives. Upon reaching the land, he arrives at a well where the local shepherds have gathered. This sets the stage for the events that follow. Hospitality and social customs. In biblical times, wells were important gathering places and served as crucial sources of water for both humans and animals. Rolling the stone from the well's mouth was necessary to access the water. By doing so, the shepherds displayed hospitality and goodwill towards Jacob, allowing him and his flocks to drink from the well. This act of kindness reflects the importance of social customs and hospitality prevalent in ancient Near Eastern cultures. Symbolism and foreshadowing. The rolling of the stone from the well's mouth and its subsequent placement back on top can also carry symbolic and foreshadowing significance. The stone acts as a barrier, protecting the water source from contamination and ensuring its proper usage. In a metaphorical sense, this act foreshadows the challenges and obstacles Jacob will face in his quest for a wife and the subsequent consequences of his actions. Providence and divine guidance. Throughout the biblical narrative, we see instances of divine intervention and guidance. Jacob's arrival at the well, where he encounters shepherds willing to assist him, can be seen as an example of God's providence. God's guidance and provision for Jacob are evident as the story unfolds, leading him to meet Rachel, whom he eventually marries. Lessons and applications. This verse reminds us of the importance of hospitality, kindness, and respecting local customs. It encourages us to be mindful of our actions and how they can impact others. Additionally, it points to the faithfulness of God in leading us to the right places and orchestrating events for His purposes. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 3 highlights the beginning of Jacob's journey in search of a wife and the significance of the shepherd's hospitality at the well. This verse also sets the stage for the subsequent events that unfold, ultimately revealing God's faithfulness and providence in Jacob's life. Genesis chapter 29 verse 4, "And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we." Context. The verse is part of the narrative of Jacob's journey to Haran, where he was sent by his father Isaac to find a wife from among his relatives. Upon reaching Haran, Jacob encounters a group of shepherds near a well. This verse captures Jacob's interaction with the shepherds. Jacob's question. Jacob addresses the shepherds as "my brethren," and asks them where they are from. This shows Jacob's polite and friendly approach, acknowledging their shared humanity and seeking information about their origin. This question highlights Jacob's desire to connect with others and his readiness to engage in conversation. Identifying their origin, the shepherds respond to Jacob's question by saying, "Of Haran are we." This reveals that they are from the same place Jacob is heading to, which is significant in Jacob's journey to find a wife. The fact that they are from Haran indicates that Jacob is on the right path and nearing his destination. Lessons from the verse. Respectful engagement. Jacob's address as "brethren" and his courteous inquiry demonstrate the importance of respectful and kind communication with others. This attitude can foster positive interactions and build relationships. Seeking information. Jacob's question reflects his curiosity and willingness to gather information. It teaches us the value of being inquisitive and open to learning from others. Confirmation of direction. The response of the shepherds serves as a confirmation to Jacob that he is on the correct path. This reminds us that as we journey through life, God often provides confirmations and signs to guide us in the right direction. Application. Engage in respectful dialogue. Following Jacob's example, we should strive to engage with others respectfully, treating them as equals and valuing their perspectives. Cultivate curiosity. Like Jacob, we should cultivate a spirit of curiosity and a desire to learn from others. By asking questions and seeking knowledge, we can broaden our understanding and grow in wisdom. Seek confirmation from God. Just as Jacob received confirmation about his direction, we can seek God's guidance and signs in our own lives. Through prayer, seeking wisdom from Scripture, and being attuned to God's leading, we can find assurance and confirmation in our journey of faith. Remember to study the surrounding verses and consult commentaries or additional resources for a deeper understanding of the passage. Genesis chapter 29 verse 5. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. This verse is a part of the narrative in the book of Genesis that describes the journey of Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, to find a wife from his extended family. Jacob had fled from his home after deceiving his father and brother, and he was on his way to his uncle Laban's house. In this particular verse, Jacob encounters a group of shepherds near the well in Haran. He initiates a conversation with them, asking if they know Laban, his uncle. The shepherds respond affirmatively, saying that they indeed know Laban. This verse serves as a transitional passage in the larger narrative, leading to Jacob's eventual meeting with Laban and the events that follow. It highlights the importance of familial connections and introduces Laban as a key character in Jacob's journey. From a broader perspective, this verse reminds us of the significance of relationships and the role they play in our lives. Jacob's desire to find a wife from his own family reflects the cultural practices of that time, emphasizing the importance of familial ties and the desire to maintain and strengthen them. As we reflect on this verse, we can consider the value of family and the significance of maintaining healthy relationships with our relatives. It also reminds us of the importance of seeking guidance and connection with others as we navigate our own journeys in life. Genesis chapter 29 verse 6. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well, and behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. Genesis chapter 29 verse 6 is part of the account of Jacob's journey to the land of his relatives in Paddan Aram. In this verse, Jacob encounters shepherds near the well in Haran, and he inquires about his uncle Laban, seeking information about his well-being. The shepherds inform Jacob that Laban is well and that his daughter Rachel is approaching with the sheep. To gain a better understanding of this verse, it's helpful to consider the context and the broader story. In the previous verses, Jacob arrived at the well and encountered the shepherds who were preparing to water their flocks. This well was a gathering place for the shepherds and their sheep, and it served as a significant meeting point in the narrative. Importance of well. The well mentioned in this verse represents a crucial location in biblical narratives, often associated with meeting and interaction. Wells were essential for providing water to both humans and animals in the ancient Near East, and they became symbolic places of connection and potential encounters. In this instance, the well serves as the backdrop for Jacob's initial encounter with Rachel. Jacob's inquiry. Jacob's question, Is he well? Reflects his concern for his relatives and highlights his desire to connect with Laban, his mother's brother. This inquiry demonstrates Jacob's interest in the well-being of his extended family and foreshadows the important role Laban and his household will play in Jacob's life. Introduction of Rachel. The shepherds inform Jacob that Rachel, Laban's daughter, is approaching with the sheep. This introduction marks the beginning of Jacob's relationship with Rachel, who will later become his wife. Rachel's arrival with the sheep signifies her involvement in the family's shepherding business, which becomes a significant factor in the events that unfold. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 6 sets the stage for the unfolding of Jacob's story in Haran. It highlights Jacob's desire to reconnect with his relatives, introduces the importance of the well as a gathering place, and introduces Rachel, who will become a central figure in Jacob's life. This verse foreshadows the relationships and events that will follow as the narrative progresses. Genesis chapter 29 verse 7. And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. Context: in this verse, Jacob has arrived at the land of Haran, where he encounters a group of shepherds near a well. Jacob engages in conversation with them, and in response to their question about knowing Laban, Jacob asks them to water the sheep and go feed them. Key points and lessons. Jacob's arrival in Haran. This verse takes place when Jacob arrives in Haran after fleeing from his brother Esau. He has left behind his family and the land of Canaan, embarking on a new journey that will significantly shape his life. Jacob's encounter with the shepherds. At the well in Haran, Jacob encounters shepherds who are taking care of their sheep. This encounter leads to Jacob's eventual meeting with his cousin Rachel, whom he falls in love with and later marries. Responsibility and diligence. When the shepherds arrive, Jacob notices that it is still early in the day and not yet time for the cattle to be gathered together. However, he instructs the shepherds to water the sheep and then go and feed them. This demonstrates a sense of responsibility and diligence in taking care of the animals entrusted to their care. Compassion and kindness. Jacob's instruction to the shepherds reflects his compassionate and kind nature. He shows concern for the well-being of the sheep by ensuring they are properly watered and fed. This attribute is important as it reveals Jacob's character and how he treats others, including animals. A lesson in leadership. Although Jacob is a stranger in Haran, he assumes a leadership role by instructing the shepherds on what needs to be done. This demonstrates his ability to take charge and organize tasks, even in unfamiliar territory. Leadership involves not only issuing commands but also displaying wisdom, compassion, and a desire to serve and care for those under one's authority. Divine guidance. It is worth noting that Jacob's journey to Haran and his encounter with the shepherds are part of God's plan for his life. God had promised to bless Jacob and his descendants, and this journey was a crucial step in fulfilling that promise. This verse serves as a reminder that even in seemingly ordinary situations, God can be at work, orchestrating events according to his divine purpose. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 7 highlights Jacob's sense of responsibility, compassion, and leadership qualities. It also underscores the idea that God's providence is at work, guiding the course of events in our lives, even in seemingly mundane circumstances. Genesis chapter 29 verse 8. And they said, We cannot, until all the flocks be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep. This verse is part of the narrative of Jacob's journey to find a wife from his uncle Laban's family. Jacob had arrived in the land of Haran and encountered a group of shepherds near a well. He inquired about Laban and his family and learned that they were familiar with them. In response to Jacob's question, the shepherds explain why they are waiting before watering their sheep. This passage reveals several significant elements that we can explore further. Waiting for the flocks to be gathered. The shepherds mention that they cannot water their sheep until all the flocks are gathered together. This indicates that it was a customary practice to wait for all the shepherds to arrive before accessing the water source. The shepherds likely wanted to ensure fairness and equality by allowing everyone to have a chance to water their flocks without any favoritism or disputes. Rolling the stone from the well's mouth. Another reason for the delay mentioned by the shepherds is the presence of a stone covering the well's mouth. To access the water, they needed to remove the stone first. This action required physical effort, coordination, and the participation of multiple shepherds to accomplish. These details provide insights into the social dynamics and customs of that time. The shepherds operated collectively, cooperating to fulfill their responsibilities while respecting the agreed-upon practices of the community. From a broader perspective, this verse highlights the theme of patience and waiting. Jacob had just arrived in a foreign land and was eager to find his relatives. The delay in watering the sheep serves as a reminder that sometimes we must exercise patience and abide by established protocols before achieving our desired goals. It encourages us to respect the customs and practices of others, demonstrating a willingness to work in harmony with those around us. Additionally, this verse can also be seen as foreshadowing Jacob's future experiences in Laban's household. Jacob faced various trials and challenges during his time with Laban, including working for 14 years to marry his beloved Rachel. The process of waiting for the flocks to be gathered and the stone to be rolled represents a precursor to Jacob's patience and perseverance in the years to come. Genesis chapter 29 verse 9. And while he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. This verse is part of the narrative in Genesis that recounts the story of Jacob, who had fled from his home after deceiving his father and brother. Jacob arrived in a new land and encountered a well where shepherds were gathering with their flocks. In the preceding verses, Jacob had asked the shepherds about their origins and learned that they were from Haran, his ancestral home. As verse 9 begins, Jacob is still conversing with the shepherds. At that moment, Rachel, the daughter of Laban, the brother of Jacob's mother, arrives at the scene. She comes with her father's sheep, as she was responsible for tending and caring for them. This introduction of Rachel is significant in the biblical narrative because it marks the beginning of a significant chapter in Jacob's life. Genesis chapter 29 verse 9 highlights Rachel's presence and her role as a shepherdess. It foreshadows the relationship that will develop between Rachel and Jacob. Later in the chapter, Jacob falls in love with Rachel and agrees to work for Laban for 7 years to marry her. However, Laban deceives Jacob and gives him Rachel's older sister, Leah, in marriage instead. Jacob then agrees to work an additional 7 years to marry Rachel as well. This verse also provides insight into the cultural context of biblical times. In ancient societies, shepherding was a common occupation, and it often fell to the younger members of a family, such as Rachel, to care for the sheep. This detail helps paint a picture of the setting and the characters involved in the story. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 9 introduces Rachel as she arrives with her father's sheep while Jacob is conversing with the shepherds. This verse sets the stage for the events that follow, including Jacob's love for Rachel and his eventual marriage to her. It also provides a glimpse into the cultural context of shepherding during biblical times. Genesis chapter 29 verse 10. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel the daughter of Laban his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban his mother's brother, that Jacob went near, and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban his mother's brother. Context: Genesis chapter 29 narrates the story of Jacob's journey to Paddan Aram, where he seeks to find a wife from among his relatives. Upon reaching the land, Jacob encounters a well, where he sees Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother. This verse describes Jacob's actions upon seeing Rachel. Symbolism of the well. In biblical times, wells were significant meeting places and sources of water for both humans and animals. They often represented life and sustenance. Jacob's encounter at the well foreshadows a significant turning point in his life as he meets Rachel, who will later become his wife. Jacob's initiative and strength. The verse highlights Jacob's physical strength and initiative as he single-handedly rolls away the stone from the well's mouth. This action demonstrates Jacob's willingness to work hard and his determination to provide for the flock, which symbolizes his commitment and responsibility. God's providence. Although this verse does not explicitly mention God, it is essential to recognize God's providential hand in Jacob's journey. God had promised to bless Jacob and multiply his descendants, and this encounter with Rachel was a part of God's plan to fulfill that promise. God often works through seemingly ordinary circumstances and people to bring about his purposes. Family and relational dynamics. This verse highlights the family connections between Jacob and Laban. Jacob's willingness to work for Laban's flock demonstrates his desire to establish a relationship with his relatives and his commitment to their well-being. It also sets the stage for the subsequent events in the narrative, including Jacob's agreement to work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. Application: Genesis chapter 29 verse 10 teaches us several lessons. First, it reminds us of the importance of being diligent and proactive in our responsibilities. Jacob's actions at the well exemplify the value of hard work and going the extra mile. Second, it reminds us to be open to God's leading in our lives, even in seemingly ordinary encounters. God can work through everyday situations to bring about His plans and blessings. Finally, it emphasizes the significance of family relationships and the need to honor and care for our relatives. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 10 provides us with a glimpse into Jacob's journey, highlighting his initiative, God's providence, and the significance of family dynamics. Genesis chapter 29 verse 11. And Jacob kissed Rachel, and lifted up his voice, and wept. Context: Genesis chapter 29 tells the story of Jacob's journey to find a wife from his uncle Laban's household. When Jacob arrived at the well where shepherds gathered with their flocks, he encountered Rachel, Laban's younger daughter. This verse describes Jacob's emotional response to meeting Rachel for the first time. Jacob's emotional reaction: upon seeing Rachel, Jacob was overwhelmed with joy and affection. He kissed her and lifted up his voice, which likely indicates his expression of happiness and gratitude to God for leading him to Rachel. Jacob's journey and God's providence. This verse reflects the providence of God in Jacob's life. Jacob had left his homeland, fearing his brother Esau's anger, and embarked on a journey to find a wife. In this encounter, God orchestrated the meeting between Jacob and Rachel, fulfilling His plan for Jacob's life. Symbolism of the kiss. The act of Jacob kissing Rachel holds significant symbolism. In biblical times, a kiss was often used to convey love, affection, and commitment. Jacob's kiss expresses his deep love and immediate connection to Rachel. It foreshadows their future relationship and the covenant of marriage that they would enter into. Jacob's weeping. Jacob's tears upon meeting Rachel demonstrate his genuine and profound emotions. These tears could represent a mixture of joy, relief, and gratitude. Jacob recognized God's faithfulness in guiding him to the right woman who would play a pivotal role in his life and in the fulfillment of God's covenant promises to him. Lessons for us. This verse teaches us several lessons. Firstly, it reminds us of God's providence and guidance in our lives. Even in uncertain circumstances, God works behind the scenes, orchestrating events for our good. Secondly, it highlights the importance of recognizing and appreciating God's blessings. Jacob's response reminds us to express gratitude for the people and relationships God brings into our lives. Lastly, it emphasizes the significance of genuine emotions and affection in our relationships, particularly in marriage. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 11 portrays Jacob's emotional response upon meeting Rachel for the first time. It reflects God's providence, teaches us about gratitude and appreciation for God's blessings, and underscores the importance of genuine emotions and affection in our relationships. Genesis chapter 29 verse 12. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. Context: Genesis chapter 29 verse 12 is part of the narrative that describes Jacob's journey to find a wife from his ancestral homeland. Jacob had fled from his brother Esau after obtaining their father Isaac's blessing, and he arrived at the land of his relatives. In this verse, Jacob meets Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother. Importance of family ties. Jacob's introduction to Rachel emphasizes the significance of family ties and genealogy in biblical times. Jacob immediately identifies himself as her father's brother and Rebekah's son, emphasizing his connection to her and establishing a bond through shared lineage. This demonstrates the importance of maintaining and acknowledging familial relationships, which were highly valued in ancient Hebrew culture. Honesty and communication. Jacob's disclosure of his identity to Rachel reveals his honesty and transparency. It also highlights the importance of open communication in relationships. By sharing his family background, Jacob establishes a foundation of trust with Rachel, ensuring that she knows who he is and where he comes from. Rachel's enthusiasm. The verse further reveals Rachel's reaction to Jacob's declaration. She runs and tells her father, Laban, about the arrival of their relative. Rachel's eagerness and excitement demonstrate her interest and perhaps foreshadow the future events of the narrative, where Rachel becomes Jacob's beloved wife. God's providence. Though not explicitly mentioned in this verse, the larger context of Genesis portrays God's providential hand in Jacob's life. Jacob's journey to his ancestral land and his encounter with Rachel are part of God's plan to fulfill the promises he made to Abraham and Isaac concerning their descendants. This story highlights how God works through ordinary events and people to bring about his divine purposes. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 12 highlights the significance of family ties, honesty, communication, and God's providence. It reminds us of the importance of valuing and nurturing our relationships, while also recognizing that God orchestrates events in our lives for his ultimate purposes. Genesis chapter 29 verse 13. And it came to pass, when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. In this verse, we witness an important event in the life of Jacob, one of the prominent figures in the book of Genesis. To better understand the significance of this verse, let's provide some context. Jacob was the grandson of Abraham and the son of Isaac. After deceiving his father Isaac to receive the blessing that was intended for his older brother Esau, Jacob fled from his family to escape Esau's anger. In his journey, he arrived at a place called Haran, which was his mother Rebekah's homeland. Upon reaching Haran, Jacob encountered shepherds near a well, and he inquired about them and the place. As he conversed with the shepherds, he learned that they were from Haran and knew his uncle Laban. They mentioned that Laban's daughter Rachel, Jacob's cousin, would soon arrive with her father's flock. Now, let's focus on Genesis chapter 29 verse 13 itself. When Laban, Rachel's father, heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hastened to meet him. The verse describes Laban's actions. He ran to greet Jacob, embraced him, kissed him, and then brought him to his house. After that, Jacob recounted to Laban all that had happened, likely referring to his journey and the events leading up to his arrival. This verse highlights Laban's warm reception of Jacob. Laban's immediate display of affection and hospitality, such as running to meet him and embracing him, demonstrates a positive and welcoming attitude towards his nephew. Laban's reaction suggests that he was pleased to see Jacob and was eager to have him as a member of his household. This encounter serves as a turning point in Jacob's life, as he would eventually marry Laban's daughters, Rachel and Leah. Jacob's experiences in Haran under Laban's authority would play a significant role in shaping his future and contribute to the fulfillment of God's promises to him and his descendants. It is worth noting that while Laban initially appears to be hospitable, he later proves to be cunning and manipulative in his dealings with Jacob. Nevertheless, the events described in Genesis chapter 29 verse 13 provide the foundation for the subsequent narrative and illustrate the beginning of Jacob's relationship with Laban. By studying this verse and the broader context, we can observe various themes, such as family dynamics, hospitality, and the intricate workings of God's providence in fulfilling his plans through human relationships and circumstances. Genesis chapter 29 verse 14. And Laban said to him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. This verse is part of the narrative of Jacob's journey to find a wife. Let's examine the context and explore the significance of this verse within the broader story. In Genesis chapter 29, Jacob had left his home and traveled to the land of his relatives to find a wife from among his own people. When he arrived in the city of Haran, he encountered a group of shepherds gathered around a well. These shepherds were waiting to water their sheep, and Jacob engaged them in conversation, inquiring about his relatives and the city. As fate would have it, the shepherds knew Laban, Jacob's uncle, who happened to be the brother of Jacob's mother, Rebekah. They pointed out Laban's daughter Rachel, who was approaching with her father's flock. Upon seeing Rachel, Jacob was smitten by her beauty and immediately rolled the stone away from the well to water Laban's flock. Laban, Rachel's father, was elated to see his nephew and said to Jacob, "Surely thou art my bone and my flesh." This statement emphasizes the close family relationship between Laban and Jacob. Laban recognized Jacob as his relative, acknowledging the kinship they shared through their common ancestors. The phrase, bone and flesh, is a metaphorical expression denoting the close bond and shared bloodline between family members. Laban's words highlight the sense of familiarity and belonging that Jacob had as a member of his own family. Laban extended hospitality to Jacob, inviting him to stay and work for him. Jacob agreed and remained with Laban for a month, during which time he would ultimately negotiate to marry both of Laban's daughters, Rachel and Leah. From a broader perspective, this verse underscores the importance of family ties and the significance of kinship within the biblical narrative. It also foreshadows the events that will unfold in the subsequent chapters, including the complexities and challenges Jacob would face as a result of his relationships with Laban and his daughters. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 14 emphasizes the recognition of family kinship and serves as a pivotal moment in Jacob's journey to find a wife, leading to significant events in his life. Genesis chapter 29 verse 15. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? This verse is part of the narrative of Jacob's journey to find a wife from his uncle Laban's family. Jacob had fled from his home after deceiving his father Isaac and receiving the birthright and blessing meant for his older brother Esau. In this verse, Laban addresses Jacob and questions him about the nature of his service. Laban acknowledges their family relationship, saying, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Laban implies that Jacob should not be working without compensation, given their familial ties. He asks Jacob to specify what his wages should be. This verse highlights an important aspect of relationships and fairness. Laban recognizes that it is not right for Jacob to serve him without receiving anything in return, even though they're family. Laban's question serves as a reminder that relationships, even familial ones, should be characterized by fairness and reciprocity. From a broader perspective, this verse can also be seen as a foreshadowing of Jacob's future experiences with Laban. Jacob will end up serving Laban for 20 years, during which Laban will repeatedly take advantage of him. This verse foreshadows the tension and challenges that will arise in their relationship. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 15 highlights the importance of fairness and equitable treatment within relationships, even among family members. It serves as a reminder that we should strive for just and reciprocal interactions in all aspects of our lives. Genesis chapter 29 verse 16. And Laban had 2 daughters, the name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. This verse is a part of the narrative in the book of Genesis that describes the journey of Jacob, the grandson of Abraham, as he leaves his homeland and travels to Paddan Aram, the region where his mother's family resides. Jacob is seeking a wife from among his relatives. In this verse, we are introduced to Laban, who is Jacob's uncle and the brother of Jacob's mother, Rebekah. Laban has 2 daughters. The elder daughter is named Leah, and the younger daughter is named Rachel. This verse sets the stage for the events that follow in the narrative, where Jacob falls in love with Rachel and agrees to work for Laban for 7 years in order to marry her. However, due to Laban's deception, Jacob ends up marrying Leah instead of Rachel. This leads to a complicated family situation and a subsequent agreement between Jacob and Laban that eventually allows Jacob to marry Rachel as well. The story of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel is a significant part of the larger narrative in the book of Genesis, highlighting themes such as God's providence, family dynamics, and the consequences of deceit. It also sets the stage for the development of the 12 tribes of Israel, as the children of Jacob and his wives become the founders of these tribes. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 16 serves as an introduction to the characters of Leah and Rachel and marks the beginning of a complex and influential narrative within the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 29 verse 17. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. This verse provides a description of the two sisters, Leah and Rachel, who were the daughters of Laban. It highlights a physical contrast between the two women. Rachel is described as beautiful and well-favored, while Leah is described as tender-eyed. Context and background. Genesis chapter 29 narrates the story of Jacob's journey to Haran, where he meets Rachel, falls in love with her, and desires to marry her. Jacob had agreed to work for Laban, Rachel's father, for 7 years in exchange for marrying Rachel. However, after the 7 years passed, Laban deceived Jacob and gave him Leah instead of Rachel. This verse comes before the account of Jacob's discovery of Laban's deception. The significance of physical descriptions. The physical descriptions of Leah and Rachel highlight the contrast between them. Rachel's beauty is emphasized, while Leah is described as having tender eyes. The exact meaning of tender eyes is uncertain, but it suggests that Leah's eyes were weak or lacking in attractiveness compared to Rachel's. Symbolism and lessons. The value of inequalities. The contrast between Rachel's beauty and Leah's tender eyes reminds us that physical appearance is not the sole measure of a person's worth. It teaches us to look beyond outward appearances and appreciate the inequalities and character of individuals. God often looks at the heart rather than the external appearance, as stated in 1 Samuel chapter 16 verse 7. God's sovereignty and human expectations. Leah's physical appearance is not what Jacob expected, and it led to a complicated situation. This incident highlights that God's plans and purposes often diverge from human expectations. It serves as a reminder that God's sovereign will prevails, even when our plans and desires are disrupted. It encourages us to trust in God's guidance and surrender our own desires to His greater purpose. The danger of favoritism. The contrast between Leah and Rachel is also linked to the theme of favoritism, which is prominent in the story of Jacob's family. Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah, and this preference caused significant strife and rivalry between the two sisters. It demonstrates the negative consequences of favoritism within families and the importance of treating all individuals fairly and with love. Further study. To gain a deeper understanding of this passage, you may want to read the entire account of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel in Genesis chapters 29 through 31. This narrative provides more insights into the complex relationships, blessings, and challenges that emerged from the circumstances surrounding this verse. Remember, as you study the Bible, it is valuable to consider different translations, consult commentaries, and seek guidance from trusted spiritual leaders to gain a well-rounded understanding of the text. Genesis chapter 29 verse 18. And Jacob loved Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. Genesis chapter 29 verse 18 is part of the narrative of Jacob's journey to his uncle Laban's house, where he meets Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, at a well. Jacob falls in love with Rachel at first sight and expresses his desire to marry her to Laban. This verse highlights Jacob's deep affection for Rachel. Love plays a significant role throughout the Bible, and here we see Jacob's immediate connection and attraction to Rachel. It is worth noting that Jacob's love for Rachel goes beyond physical appearance. It encompasses emotional attachment and a desire for companionship. Moreover, Jacob's willingness to work for Laban for 7 years to marry Rachel underscores the value he places on her. In ancient times, It was common for individuals to enter into agreements or contracts for marriage through a system known as betrothal or dowry. Jacob's offer to work for 7 years demonstrates his commitment and determination to marry Rachel. However, as the narrative continues in Genesis chapter 29, we learn that Laban deceives Jacob by giving him Leah, Rachel's older sister, in marriage instead of Rachel. Laban justifies his action by explaining that it was customary for the elder daughter to be married first. Consequently, Jacob is required to work an additional 7 years to marry Rachel, whom he still desires. This passage not only reveals Jacob's love for Rachel but also provides insight into the culture and customs of that time. It highlights the importance of commitment, perseverance, and patience in relationships and serves as a reminder that love often requires sacrifice and endurance. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 18 portrays Jacob's love for Rachel and his willingness to serve Laban for 7 years to marry her. It emphasizes the significance of love and commitment in relationships, as well as the challenges and tests that may arise along the way. Genesis chapter 29 verse 19. And Laban said, "It is better that I give her to thee, than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me." This verse is part of the narrative of Jacob's arrival in Paddan Aram and his encounter with his uncle Laban. To understand the context and significance of this verse, it is helpful to explore the broader story of Jacob's journey and his relationship with Laban. In Genesis chapter 29, Jacob, after leaving his home in Canaan to escape the wrath of his brother Esau, arrives at the well in the land of Haran. There he meets Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, and is instantly captivated by her beauty. Rachel, in turn, informs her father Laban about Jacob's arrival. Laban, upon hearing about Jacob and his kinship with Rebekah, his sister, welcomes Jacob into his home. Jacob explains to Laban how he is related to him, and Laban agrees to take him in. Following this, a month passes, and Laban proposes an arrangement to Jacob in Genesis chapter 29 verse 19. Laban's statement, "It is better that I give her to thee, than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me," reveals his recognition of Jacob's desire to marry Rachel. Laban acknowledges that it would be preferable for Rachel to marry within their family rather than marry a man from a different lineage. By suggesting that Jacob remain with him, Laban is implying that Jacob should work for him and earn Rachel's hand in marriage. This verse reflects the cultural norms and practices of the time, where marriage within the family was highly valued and desired. It also highlights Laban's awareness of Jacob's affection for Rachel and his willingness to consider Jacob as a potential husband for his daughter. However, as the subsequent verses reveal, Laban's intentions are not entirely straightforward. Laban proposes a 7-year agreement, during which Jacob will work for him in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. Yet, Laban deceives Jacob by substituting his older daughter, Leah, on the wedding night. This deceit leads to a complicated situation where Jacob eventually marries both Rachel and Leah, setting the stage for further conflicts and challenges within the family. The story of Jacob, Laban, Rachel, and Leah provides valuable lessons about the consequences of deception, the importance of fulfilling commitments, and the complexities that can arise from familial relationships. It also emphasizes the significance of God's faithfulness in the midst of human frailty and deceit. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 19 captures Laban's recognition of Jacob's desire to marry Rachel and his preference for Jacob as a potential husband. However, Laban's subsequent actions reveal a more intricate and deceptive plan, leading to a complicated marital situation. This verse serves as a starting point for a broader study of the story of Jacob and his relationships, highlighting themes of deception, commitment, and God's faithfulness. Genesis chapter 29 verse 20. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her. Genesis chapter 29 verse 20 provides us with a glimpse into the story of Jacob, who was the son of Isaac and grandson of Abraham. In this verse, Jacob is depicted as serving his uncle Laban for a period of 7 years in order to marry Rachel, Laban's younger daughter. Jacob's commitment. The verse highlights Jacob's dedication and commitment to Rachel. Despite the length of time he served, the years appeared to be as nothing to him due to the love he had for her. His love for Rachel motivated him to endure the work and wait patiently. The significance of time. The passage demonstrates the subjective nature of time when one is motivated by love. 7 years is a considerable period, but Jacob's deep affection for Rachel made it feel like a short duration. This emphasizes the power of love and its ability to transform our perception of time. Love as a driving force. Jacob's love for Rachel serves as a powerful driving force. It impelled him to take action, make sacrifices, and demonstrate his commitment. Love has the ability to motivate us to pursue and invest in relationships, and it can inspire us to go beyond our limits for the sake of another. The value of patience. Jacob's willingness to serve for 7 years reveals the virtue of patience. He had to wait for his desired outcome, showing that true love is willing to endure and persevere. Jacob's example teaches us the importance of being patient and steadfast in our relationships and goals. A foreshadowing of future events. The story of Jacob's service to marry Rachel foreshadows future events in his life. Laban deceived Jacob by giving him Leah, Rachel's older sister, as his wife instead. Jacob then had to serve an additional 7 years for Rachel. This incident reveals the consequences of Laban's deceit and the challenges Jacob faced in his pursuit of love. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 20 showcases Jacob's commitment, the subjective nature of time influenced by love, the power of love as a motivating force, the value of patience, and foreshadows future events in Jacob's life. It reminds us of the enduring power of love and the importance of steadfastness in our relationships and pursuits. Genesis chapter 29 verse 21. And Jacob said unto Laban, Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. Context. To better understand Genesis chapter 29 verse 21, it's essential to grasp the context of the verse. In this chapter, Jacob has traveled to his mother's homeland in search of a wife. He encounters Laban, his mother's brother, and agrees to work for him for 7 years in exchange for marrying Rachel, Laban's younger daughter. The verse you mentioned is spoken by Jacob after the 7 years have passed, expressing his desire to claim Rachel as his wife. Patience and perseverance. Jacob's request to Laban reveals the patience and perseverance he exhibited during those 7 years. He worked diligently and endured challenges to fulfill the agreement he made with Laban. Jacob's statement indicates that he had been eagerly awaiting the fulfillment of his promise, showing his commitment and determination. God's timing. Jacob's words also highlight the importance of God's timing in our lives. Despite his love for Rachel, Jacob waited until the appointed time to marry her. Throughout Scripture, we see that God often works in seasons and his plans unfold in his perfect timing. Jacob's fulfillment of the 7-year commitment before claiming Rachel teaches us the value of patience, trust, and reliance on God's timing. Marriage and commitment. Jacob's request to Laban to give me my wife reflects the significance of marriage and the commitment it entails. Marriage is a sacred covenant established by God, and it involves a lifelong commitment between a man and a woman. Jacob's words exemplify his desire to honor his commitment and fulfill his obligations before entering into a physical relationship with Rachel. Application. Genesis chapter 29 verse 21 encourages us to be patient, trusting in God's timing, and faithfully fulfilling our commitments. It reminds us that even when faced with delays or obstacles, we should continue to persevere and trust that God's plan will unfold in due time. It also emphasizes the importance of honoring our commitments and approaching marriage with reverence and responsibility. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 21 showcases Jacob's patience, trust in God's timing, and his commitment to honor the agreement he made. It serves as a reminder for us to trust in God's timing, fulfill our commitments faithfully, and approach marriage with reverence and responsibility. Genesis chapter 29 verse 22. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place, and made a feast. Context: Genesis chapter 29 tells the story of Jacob, who fled from his brother Esau after deceiving their father Isaac to receive the blessing of the firstborn. In this chapter, Jacob arrives at the land of his uncle Laban and meets Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, whom he falls in love with. Laban's gathering. In verse 22, Laban organizes a feast, or a wedding celebration, after Jacob had worked for him for 7 years in order to marry Rachel. It was a customary practice in ancient times to celebrate weddings with a feast, and it was a significant event in the life of the community. Significance of the gathering. Laban's gathering serves as a pivotal moment in the narrative. It signifies the fulfillment of Jacob's commitment and labor, as he had worked for 7 years to marry Rachel, whom he loved deeply. The feast marks the beginning of a new chapter in Jacob's life and his union with Rachel, the woman he desired. Symbolism of the feast. The feast can be seen as a symbol of celebration, joy, and community. It represents the coming together of people to commemorate a significant event, such as a marriage. Additionally, the feast can also be interpreted as a sign of hospitality, as Laban welcomes Jacob and his household into their community and shares in the joy of the union. Lessons from Genesis chapter 29 verse 22. Commitment and perseverance. Jacob's commitment to working for Laban for 7 years in order to marry Rachel demonstrates his perseverance and dedication. It reminds us of the importance of staying faithful to our commitments and seeing them through, even when faced with challenges or delays. The value of celebration. The gathering and feast in this verse remind us of the importance of celebrating significant milestones and events in our lives. Celebrations provide an opportunity to express gratitude, rejoice, and strengthen relationships with others. Hospitality and community. Laban's act of gathering the men of the place and organizing a feast highlights the significance of hospitality and the role of community in our lives. It encourages us to foster a spirit of togetherness, welcoming others into our lives, and building meaningful connections with those around us. Application. As we reflect on Genesis chapter 29 verse 22, we can apply its lessons to our own lives. We should be committed to our promises and persevere in our endeavors, even when faced with difficulties. We should also appreciate and celebrate significant moments in our lives, expressing gratitude for the blessings we receive. Additionally, we should strive to be hospitable and build strong connections within our communities, supporting and celebrating with one another. Remember, studying the Bible involves examining the surrounding verses and considering the broader context to gain a deeper understanding. Genesis chapter 29 verse 23. And it came to pass in the evening, that he took Leah his daughter, and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. Context. To understand the significance of Genesis chapter 29 verse 23, it's important to review the context of the verse. In this chapter, Jacob, the son of Isaac, had fled from his brother Esau and arrived in Paddan Aram, where his mother's relatives lived. Jacob fell in love with Rachel, the younger daughter of Laban, and made an agreement with Laban to work for him for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. Jacob deceived. The verse in question describes the events that unfolded after Jacob completed his 7 years of labor. According to the custom of the time, the bride would be veiled during the wedding ceremony. However, Laban deceived Jacob by substituting his older daughter, Leah, for Rachel on the wedding night. When Jacob realized he had been tricked the next morning, he confronted Laban. Lessons on deception. This passage serves as a powerful reminder of the consequences of deception. Laban's actions caused great distress and confusion for both Jacob and Leah. Deception can lead to broken trust, shattered relationships, and unintended consequences. It highlights the importance of honesty and integrity in our dealings with others. God's sovereignty. Although Jacob was deceived, it's worth noting that God's providence was at work in this situation. In subsequent verses, Laban explained that it was the custom for the eldest daughter to be married first. God allowed this turn of events to fulfill his plan and bring about the lineage through which the 12 tribes of Israel would be born. The role of Leah, who had been overshadowed by her younger sister Rachel, found herself in an unexpected position as Jacob's wife. Despite being unloved by Jacob initially, God saw her distress and blessed her with children. Leah's story reminds us that God often uses the marginalized and overlooked individuals for his purposes, showing his faithfulness and compassion. Faithfulness and commitment. Genesis chapter 29 verse 23 also highlights the importance of honoring commitments and maintaining fidelity in marriage. While Jacob's heart was set on Rachel, he was bound by his commitment to Leah as her husband. This verse serves as a cautionary reminder of the consequences of straying from the commitments we have made to our spouses. Redemption and forgiveness. The story of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel continues with themes of redemption and forgiveness. Over time, Jacob's love for Leah grew, and God eventually blessed Rachel with children as well. This narrative reminds us of God's ability to bring healing and reconciliation even in situations marked by pain, betrayal, and deception. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 23 provides insights into the consequences of deception, God's sovereignty in challenging circumstances, the value of faithfulness and commitment, and the possibility of redemption and forgiveness. It serves as a reminder to act with honesty and integrity, trust in God's plan, and seek reconciliation in the face of difficulties. Genesis chapter 29 verse 24. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah his maid for an handmaid. Context. Genesis chapter 29 tells the story of Jacob's arrival in the land of his uncle Laban. Jacob fell in love with Laban's younger daughter, Rachel, and agreed to work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for her hand in marriage. However, on the wedding night, Laban deceived Jacob by giving him his elder daughter, Leah, instead of Rachel. Deception and consequences. Laban's actions in giving Leah to Jacob instead of Rachel highlight the theme of deception and its consequences. This event reveals the consequences of Jacob's own earlier deceit when he disguised himself as his brother Esau to receive the blessing from their father, Isaac. Jacob experiences firsthand the pain and betrayal that his own deception had caused. Laban's motivation. Laban's motivation for deceiving Jacob stems from his own desire for personal gain. Laban recognized that Jacob's love for Rachel was strong, and he used this opportunity to exploit Jacob's devotion. Laban's actions reflect a lack of integrity and a willingness to manipulate others for his own benefit. God's sovereignty. Although Laban's actions were motivated by deceit, God's sovereignty is evident in the outcome. While Jacob was initially upset by the deception, he eventually married Rachel as well, and God blessed him with 12 sons who became the 12 tribes of Israel. God's plan was not thwarted by Laban's deceit, and he used this situation to fulfill his purposes. Lessons for today. Integrity. Laban's actions serve as a reminder of the importance of integrity in our dealings with others. We should strive to be honest and fair in all our interactions, avoiding deceit and manipulation. Consequences of deception. Laban's deceit had far-reaching consequences. It caused pain and discord within the family and strained relationships. This teaches us to consider the potential consequences of our actions and to act in a manner that reflects God's truth and love. Trusting in God's sovereignty. Despite the deceit and challenges Jacob faced, God remained faithful to his promises. This encourages us to trust in God's sovereignty even in difficult circumstances, knowing that He can work all things for our good. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 29 verse 24 reveals Laban's deceit in giving Jacob Leah instead of Rachel. This event highlights the consequences of deception, the importance of integrity, and the trustworthiness of God's sovereignty. It reminds us to act with honesty and to trust in God's plan, even in challenging situations. Genesis chapter 29 verse 25. And it came to pass, that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, What is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? In this verse, we witness an important event in the life of Jacob, one of the prominent figures in the book of Genesis. To provide context, Jacob had traveled to the land of Haran, his ancestral home, in order to find a wife from among his relatives. He arrived at a well and encountered Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother. Jacob fell in love with Rachel and offered to work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for her hand in marriage. The verse takes place on the morning following Jacob's wedding night. However, to his surprise and dismay, Jacob discovers that Laban had deceived him. Instead of Rachel, he had married Leah, Rachel's older sister. The shock and confusion Jacob experienced are evident in his reaction. This event raises several significant themes and lessons. Deception and consequences. Laban's act of deceit highlights the consequences of dishonesty. Laban exploited Jacob's love for Rachel and took advantage of the situation, leading to unforeseen consequences. This serves as a reminder of the importance of integrity and honesty in our interactions with others. Divine sovereignty. Although Jacob was deceived, we can see God's sovereignty at work in the unfolding of events. In Genesis chapter 29 verses 26 and 27, Laban justifies his actions by stating that it was not customary to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Thus, God's plan was ultimately fulfilled as Jacob would later marry Rachel as well. Patience and perseverance. Jacob's story teaches us about patience and perseverance. Despite the disappointment and confusion, Jacob continues to work for Laban for another 7 years to secure Rachel's hand in marriage. This demonstrates Jacob's enduring commitment and trust in God's plan. Human fallibility. The story of Jacob, Laban, Rachel, and Leah also highlights the flawed nature of human beings. Jacob's desire for Rachel blinded him to the possibility of deceit, and Laban's actions reveal his own manipulative tendencies. These characters remind us of our own capacity to err and the need for humility and self-reflection. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 25 presents a pivotal moment in the life of Jacob, emphasizing the themes of deception, consequences, divine sovereignty, patience, perseverance, and human fallibility. Through this account, we can glean important lessons about integrity, trust in God's plan, and self-awareness. Genesis chapter 29 verse 26. And Laban said, "It must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn." Context. In this passage, Laban, the father of Rachel and Leah, has deceived Jacob into marrying Leah instead of Rachel. Jacob had worked for Laban for 7 years to marry Rachel, but Laban tricked him by giving Leah in marriage instead. Jacob confronted Laban, questioning why he had deceived him. Cultural background. Laban's statement reflects a cultural practice prevalent at that time. In ancient Near Eastern societies, the firstborn son held a position of privilege and received certain rights and blessings, including a larger inheritance. It was customary for the eldest daughter to be married before the younger daughter, and Laban appeals to this cultural norm as his reason for deceiving Jacob. Deception and consequences. Laban's deception had significant consequences for everyone involved. Jacob had to work an additional 7 years to marry Rachel, the woman he loved. Leah, who was also deceived, ended up in a marriage where she was not loved as much as Rachel. This situation resulted in rivalry and jealousy between the two sisters. The passage highlights the consequences of deceit and the impact it can have on relationships. God's sovereignty. Despite the human deception and its consequences, we can see God's sovereignty at work. God had promised Jacob that he would have descendants and that through him, all nations would be blessed. Genesis chapter 28 verse 14. In fulfilling his promise, God used this situation to establish the 12 tribes of Israel through the sons of Jacob, who were born to Leah, Rachel, and their maidservants. Lessons for today. Honesty and integrity. The passage reminds us of the importance of honesty and integrity in our relationships. Deception and trickery can lead to broken trust and long-lasting consequences. Trusting in God's plan. Even in situations where we face deceit or unfairness, we can trust in God's sovereignty and His ability to work out His purposes. Jacob's story reminds us that God can bring good out of difficult circumstances. Treating others justly, Laban's actions serve as a warning against treating others unjustly for personal gain. As believers, we are called to love our neighbors as ourselves and to treat others with fairness and respect. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 29 verse 26 presents a pivotal moment in Jacob's life, where Laban's deception impacts Jacob's relationships with both Leah and Rachel. It highlights the consequences of deceit and emphasizes the importance of honesty, integrity, and trusting in God's plan even in the face of injustice. Genesis chapter 29 verse 27. Finish her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. In this verse, Laban, the father of Jacob's desired wife Rachel, responds to Jacob's request to marry her. Let's explore the context and the key lessons we can draw from this passage. Background and context. Prior to this verse, Jacob had arrived at the land of Haran and encountered Rachel, Laban's younger daughter, at a well. He immediately fell in love with her and offered to work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. Laban agreed to the proposal. However, when the 7 years were completed, Laban deceived Jacob and gave him his older daughter, Leah, instead of Rachel. Jacob was then required to work an additional 7 years to marry Rachel, the woman he loved. Honoring commitments. The verse highlights the importance of honoring commitments and fulfilling obligations. Jacob had fulfilled his part of the agreement by serving Laban for 7 years. However, Laban reminds Jacob to complete the marriage celebration and fulfill his service for the full week of festivities before he could marry Rachel. Laban's words emphasize the need for completion and integrity in keeping promises. Patience and perseverance. The verse also underscores the theme of patience and perseverance. Jacob had to wait an additional 7 years to marry Rachel, demonstrating his commitment and love for her. This event serves as a reminder that sometimes we need to endure hardships and delay gratification for the things we value. Jacob's patience and perseverance teach us valuable lessons in waiting for God's timing and not giving up on our dreams. Consequences of deception. The broader narrative leading up to this verse highlights the consequences of deception. Laban's actions in deceiving Jacob by giving him Leah instead of Rachel had significant consequences. This deception not only affected Jacob's immediate circumstances but also had long-term consequences in his relationships with Leah and Rachel. This serves as a reminder of the negative outcomes that can result from deceit and the importance of honesty and transparency in our interactions with others. God's sovereignty and His faithfulness. Though not explicitly mentioned in this verse, it is important to recognize God's sovereignty and faithfulness throughout this story. God had promised to bless Jacob and his descendants, Genesis chapter 28 verse 14, and despite the challenges and trials Jacob faced, God remained faithful to His promise. The story of Jacob serves as a testament to God's faithfulness in fulfilling His plans and purposes, even in the midst of human deceit and flawed decisions. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 27 captures a significant moment in Jacob's life, emphasizing the importance of honoring commitments, patience, and perseverance. It also highlights the consequences of deception and reminds us of God's sovereignty and faithfulness. These lessons continue to hold relevance for us today as we navigate our own relationships and seek to live with integrity and trust in God's plan for our lives. Genesis chapter 29 verse 28. And Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. Context. The verse is part of the account of Jacob's encounter with Laban, his uncle, and his desire to marry Rachel, Laban's younger daughter. Jacob agreed to work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. Fulfilled her week. In ancient Hebrew culture, a wedding celebration typically lasted for 7 days. The phrase, fulfilled her week, refers to the completion of this wedding celebration or feast. Jacob fulfilled his commitment by waiting for the designated period before officially taking Rachel as his wife. Lessons from the passage. Faithfulness and patience. Jacob demonstrated faithfulness and patience by fulfilling his commitment to Laban. Despite having to wait for 7 years, he remained steadfast in his desire to marry Rachel. Honoring promises. Jacob's commitment to work for Laban for 7 years highlights the importance of honoring our promises and commitments. Jacob's integrity and determination to fulfill his word serve as an example to us in keeping our own commitments. Endurance through trials. Waiting for 7 years for Rachel tested Jacob's endurance. It reminds us that sometimes we need to endure trials or delays to achieve our desired goals. It teaches us the value of perseverance and the rewards that come from patiently enduring through challenging seasons of life. Cultural customs. The verse also gives us insight into the cultural practices of the time. The week-long wedding celebration was a significant part of the marriage process in that era. Spiritual applications. Christ and the Church. Some theologians see a parallel between Jacob's commitment and Christ's commitment to the Church. Just as Jacob faithfully waited for Rachel, Jesus Christ is the bridegroom who awaits the full consummation of his relationship with the Church, believers, in the future. God's timing. The passage serves as a reminder that God's timing is not always immediate. Like Jacob, we may have to wait for the fulfillment of God's promises in our lives. It encourages us to trust in God's timing and have faith that His plans will come to pass. The importance of celebration. The week-long celebration in the ancient Hebrew culture reminds us of the significance of celebration in our own lives. It is important to take time to rejoice and give thanks for God's blessings and faithfulness. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 28 teaches us about faithfulness, patience, honoring commitments, enduring trials, and trusting in God's timing. It also offers insights into cultural customs of the time and provides spiritual applications that can be relevant to our lives today. Genesis chapter 29 verse 29. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah his handmaid to be her maid. Context. This verse is part of the narrative of Jacob's time with his uncle Laban in Paddan Aram. Jacob had initially worked for Laban for 7 years to marry Rachel, but Laban deceived him and gave him Leah instead. After fulfilling his commitment of marrying Leah, Jacob worked an additional 7 years to marry Rachel. Laban's deception. Laban, Rachel's father, deceived Jacob by giving him Leah instead of Rachel on their wedding night. It was a custom in that culture for the older daughter to marry first, but Laban should have made the arrangement clear to Jacob. Laban's actions caused Jacob to work an additional 7 years to marry Rachel. Polygamy. The verse introduces the concept of polygamy, which was prevalent in ancient cultures, including the patriarchal period of the Old Testament. Laban gave Rachel her handmaid, Bilhah, to be her maid. This was a common practice in those times, where a wife could give her maidservant to her husband as a concubine or secondary wife to bear children on her behalf. Consequences of polygamy. While polygamy was practiced in the Old Testament, it often led to tension and conflict among the wives. In the case of Jacob, having multiple wives caused strife and rivalry between Rachel and Leah, leading to family discord and jealousy. The consequences of polygamy can be seen throughout the narrative of Jacob's family. God's original design for marriage. It is important to note that the Bible presents God's original design for marriage as the union between one man and one woman, Genesis chapter 2 verse 24. Polygamy, although tolerated in some instances, is not presented as the ideal or God's intention from the beginning. Lessons for today. While studying this verse, it is essential to consider the cultural and historical context of the biblical narrative. The practice of polygamy, as seen in the story of Jacob, brings to light the complications and challenges it can create in relationships. Today, Christians are called to uphold the biblical standard of marriage as a lifelong commitment between one man and one woman, based on love, mutual respect, and faithfulness. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 29 highlights Laban's deception and the introduction of polygamy into Jacob's family. Although polygamy was practiced in the Old Testament, it often led to complications and discord within families. As Christians, we are called to recognize God's original design for marriage and strive to follow His plan for healthy, loving, and faithful relationships. Genesis chapter 29 verse 30. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. Context: Genesis chapter 29 tells the story of Jacob, who fled from his home after deceiving his brother Esau. He arrived in the land of his relatives and met Laban, his mother's brother. Jacob fell in love with Laban's younger daughter, Rachel, and agreed to work for Laban for 7 years in order to marry her. Jacob's love for Rachel. After fulfilling the 7 years of service, Jacob married Rachel, whom he loved deeply. This verse highlights Jacob's strong affection for Rachel. It is important to note that Jacob's love for Rachel did not diminish his obligations and commitments. He completed the agreed-upon period of service to Laban before marrying Rachel. The presence of Leah. The latter part of the verse mentions Leah, Rachel's older sister. It indicates that Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. This introduces a complex family dynamic that plays a significant role in the subsequent events and challenges Jacob faced. Laban deceived Jacob into marrying Leah instead of Rachel on his wedding night, leading to further complications. The additional years of service. The verse concludes by mentioning that Jacob continued to serve Laban for another 7 years. This indicates that despite the disappointment of marrying Leah instead of Rachel, Jacob was willing to work another 7 years to obtain Rachel as his wife. It demonstrates his commitment and perseverance in pursuing what he desired. Lessons and applications. The power of love. Jacob's love for Rachel serves as a reminder of the strength and intensity of love. Love can motivate us to make sacrifices and endure hardships for the sake of the one we love. However, it is essential to maintain integrity and fulfill our obligations while pursuing love. Dealing with disappointment. Jacob's experience of marrying Leah instead of Rachel teaches us about dealing with unexpected disappointments. Sometimes, life does not unfold as we expect or desire, and we must navigate such situations with grace and wisdom. Perseverance and patience. Jacob's willingness to work another 7 years for Rachel displays perseverance and patience. Similarly, in our own lives, we may face delays, setbacks, or unfulfilled desires. The story encourages us to remain steadfast and trust in God's timing. Family dynamics and consequences. The verse also highlights the complex family dynamics and consequences of Jacob's choices. The subsequent events in Jacob's life, including the rivalry between Leah and Rachel, reflect the complications that can arise from favoritism and deception within families. It reminds us of the importance of honesty, fairness, and open communication in our own family relationships. In summary, Genesis chapter 29 verse 30 showcases Jacob's deep love for Rachel, his willingness to work additional years for her, and the subsequent challenges arising from the presence of Leah. The passage offers lessons on love, dealing with disappointment, perseverance, and the consequences of family dynamics. Genesis chapter 29 verse 31. And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. This verse is a significant part of the narrative in the book of Genesis that tells the story of Jacob, Rachel, and Leah. To gain a better understanding of this verse, it's helpful to explore the context surrounding it. In the preceding verses, we learn that Jacob had arrived at the land of his mother's relatives and had encountered Rachel, the daughter of Laban, whom he loved. Jacob made an agreement with Laban to work for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. However, after fulfilling his end of the agreement, Laban deceived Jacob by giving him Leah, Rachel's older sister, as his wife instead. In verse 31, the passage describes the Lord's observation that Leah was unloved by Jacob. The term hated in this context does not necessarily imply intense hatred but rather suggests that Leah was not Jacob's first choice or primary love. This unbalanced affection within the family caused emotional distress for Leah. However, despite Leah's undesired position and unrequited love, The verse goes on to say that the Lord opened her womb while Rachel remained barren. This phrase implies that God enabled Leah to conceive and bear children, whereas Rachel faced difficulty in becoming pregnant. The contrast between Leah's fertility and Rachel's barrenness serves as an essential element in this narrative. It reveals how God intervened in Leah's life, possibly to demonstrate his sovereignty and to bring honor to Leah. By granting her the ability to conceive, God brought forth a sense of significance and blessing to Leah, even though she may have been unloved by her husband. This passage presents several themes for reflection. God's awareness and intervention. The verse highlights God's attentiveness to the lives of his people. He sees the pain and unfair treatment Leah experienced and responds by opening her womb. This reminds us that God is intimately involved in our lives and cares about our well-being. God's sovereignty. The contrast between Leah and Rachel's fertility reveals God's authority over human circumstances. He can bless and provide even in the midst of unfavorable situations. This emphasizes that God's plans and purposes may unfold differently than we expect. Value beyond human approval. Leah's story reminds us that our worth is not determined by human approval or affection. Despite being unloved by Jacob, Leah found validation and significance through God's blessings. This encourages us to seek our value in God's love and acceptance rather than solely in the opinions or affections of others. Overall, Genesis chapter 29 verse 31 demonstrates God's ability to bring about blessings and fulfillment in unexpected ways. It serves as a reminder that his plans and interventions often surpass human understanding and that his love and provision can reach us even in the midst of difficult circumstances. Genesis chapter 29 verse 32. And Leah conceived, and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben. For she said, Surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction, now therefore my husband will love me. Genesis chapter 29 recounts the story of Jacob's arrival in Paddan Aram and his encounter with his relatives, Laban and his daughters Leah and Rachel. In this verse, Leah, who was unloved by Jacob, gives birth to her first son, whom she names Reuben. The name Reuben means, see, a son, or, behold, a son. This verse reflects the complex dynamics and relational struggles within Jacob's family. It highlights the deep yearning Leah had for her husband's love and acceptance. Leah believed that by bearing Jacob a son, he would finally acknowledge and love her. However, it is important to note that Leah's motivation in naming her son Reuben seems to be centered on her desire for Jacob's affection rather than her recognition of God's blessing. Leah's longing for love and acceptance is a relatable human experience. It underscores the significance of love and emotional connection within family relationships. However, this passage also reveals the brokenness and unfulfilled expectations that can exist in family dynamics. Leah's hope for her husband's love is ultimately not fulfilled, as Jacob's affections remain primarily directed towards Rachel, his desired wife. From a broader perspective, this passage reminds us of the consequences of deception and manipulation. Jacob had been deceived by Laban into marrying Leah instead of Rachel, whom he had initially intended to marry. The subsequent rivalry between Leah and Rachel, their competition for Jacob's love and attention, and the manipulation within the family bring about pain and discord. As we reflect on this passage, it serves as a reminder of the importance of open communication, honesty, and genuine love within our relationships. It also highlights the need to seek God's guidance and trust in His providence in all circumstances, even when our desires and expectations are unmet. Ultimately, God is the source of unconditional love and acceptance that surpasses human relationships and can bring healing and restoration to brokenness. Genesis chapter 29 verse 33. And she conceived again, and bare a son, and said, Because the Lord hath heard that I was hated, He hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. This verse is part of the narrative in Genesis that describes the story of Jacob, also known as Israel, and his relationships with his wives Leah and Rachel. Let's delve into the context and explore the significance of this particular verse. In Genesis chapter 29, we learn that Jacob fled from his home and went to the land of his mother's relatives, seeking refuge and hoping to find a wife. There he encountered Laban, his mother's brother, and agreed to work for him for 7 years in exchange for Rachel's hand in marriage. However, Laban deceived Jacob by giving him Leah, his eldest daughter, as a wife instead of Rachel. Jacob confronted Laban about this, and as a result, Laban allowed him to marry Rachel as well, but Jacob had to work an additional 7 years. In the midst of this complicated marital situation, Leah, who was initially unloved by Jacob, experienced fertility while Rachel remained barren. Genesis chapter 29 verse 33 focuses on the birth of Leah's third son, whom she named Simeon. The name, Simeon, means heard, or one who hears, in Hebrew, and Leah attributed his birth to the fact that the Lord had heard her affliction and responded with the gift of a son. Leah's words reflect her perception of her own circumstances. She believed that her son Simeon was given to her by God in response to her feeling hated by Jacob. The birth of Simeon brought a sense of validation and comfort to Leah, as she believed that God had seen her distress and had shown her favor through the birth of this child. It is worth noting that Leah's perspective on her situation differs from that of Rachel, who desired to bear children but was unable to do so. The contrast between the two sisters' experiences reveals the complexities and dynamics of their relationships with Jacob and their individual journeys of faith. From a broader perspective, this verse reminds us that God is attentive and compassionate toward His people. It highlights the biblical theme of God's concern for the oppressed, the afflicted, and those who feel unloved or marginalized. Leah's proclamation demonstrates her faith in God's involvement in her life and her recognition that He had not forgotten her. Genesis chapter 29 verse 33 teaches us the importance of acknowledging and expressing gratitude for the blessings we receive, even in the midst of challenging circumstances. It encourages us to turn to God, knowing that He hears our cries and responds with His loving kindness. Overall, this verse offers valuable insights into the story of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel, revealing the faith and hope of a woman who felt unloved but found solace in God's provision. Genesis chapter 29 verse 34, "And she conceived again, and bare a son, and said, Now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore was his name called Levi." Genesis chapter 29 verse 34 is part of the account of Jacob's relationship with his wives, Leah and Rachel. To understand the significance of this verse, it is helpful to review the context leading up to this event. Jacob had fled from his home in Canaan after deceiving his father, Isaac, and stealing his brother Esau's birthright blessing. He went to his mother's relatives in Paddan Aram, where he encountered Laban, his uncle. Jacob fell in love with Laban's younger daughter, Rachel, and agreed to work for Laban for 7 years in exchange for her hand in marriage. However, Laban deceived Jacob on his wedding night and gave him Leah, Rachel's older sister, as his wife. Jacob discovered the deception in the morning and confronted Laban, who explained that it was not their custom to give the younger daughter in marriage before the elder. Jacob agreed to work for Laban for an additional 7 years in order to marry Rachel, whom he loved. Laban agreed, and Jacob married Rachel after the week of wedding celebrations with Leah. Despite being married to 2 sisters, Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. The verse in question, Genesis chapter 29 verse 34, occurs after Leah gave birth to 3 sons consecutively. Each time Leah gave birth, she hoped that her husband, Jacob, would grow closer to her and love her more. The name of her third son, Levi, reflects her anticipation, as Levi means joined or attached. Leah's hope was that through the birth of 3 sons, she would secure a stronger bond with Jacob. However, it is important to note that Jacob's affection remained primarily directed toward Rachel, which caused tension and rivalry between the 2 sisters. From a broader perspective, this verse reminds us of the complexities and consequences of human relationships. It illustrates the longing for acceptance, love, and validation that Leah experienced. It also highlights the consequences of Jacob's initial deception, as it created a strained relationship between the two sisters and contributed to the family dynamics and conflicts that unfolded later in the narrative. Ultimately, the story of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel in Genesis serves as a reminder of the importance of honesty, communication, and treating others with love and respect. It also emphasizes the consequences that can arise from favoritism and the pain that can result from unfulfilled desires and unmet expectations in relationships. Genesis chapter 29 verse 35. And she conceived again, and bare a son. And she said, Now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and left bearing. This verse is part of the account of Jacob's marriages and the birth of his children. In this particular verse, Jacob's wife Leah gives birth to her fourth son, and she names him Judah. Here are some key points to consider in a Bible study of Genesis chapter 29 verse 35. Context. It's important to understand the broader context of this verse. Jacob had married Leah and her sister Rachel, and both sisters were vying for Jacob's love and attention. Leah had been feeling unloved by Jacob, as he favored Rachel over her. However, after giving birth to Judah, she expresses gratitude and praise to the Lord. The meaning of Judah, Leah's choice of name for her son, is significant. The name, Judah, means praise or praised. Leah names her son Judah as an expression of her thankfulness and acknowledgement of God's blessing in giving her another son. This indicates her shift in focus from seeking Jacob's love to recognizing God's love and provision. Spiritual significance. The birth of Judah holds spiritual significance in the biblical narrative. Judah would later become one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the lineage of Jesus Christ, the Messiah, would come through the tribe of Judah. This connection between Judah and the messianic lineage emphasizes God's providence and his plan of redemption through the line of David, a descendant of Judah. Leah's transformation. Leah's journey from desiring Jacob's love to finding her worth in God is evident throughout the story. Initially, she had hoped that bearing sons for Jacob would win his affection, but she eventually realizes that true fulfillment comes from praising and seeking God. Naming her son Judah reflects Leah's spiritual growth and her understanding of the importance of worshiping and praising God. Lessons for believers. Leah's example teaches us the importance of recognizing and appreciating God's blessings in our lives, even in challenging circumstances. Like Leah, we may face times when we feel unloved or overlooked, but turning our focus towards God and praising Him can bring about a transformation in our hearts. Leah's story encourages us to find our ultimate fulfillment and worth in God rather than seeking it solely from human relationships. In conclusion, Genesis chapter 29 verse 35 captures an important moment in the life of Leah and the broader narrative of Jacob's family. Leah's naming of her son Judah reflects her shift in perspective and her recognition of God's blessings. This verse holds spiritual significance as it points towards the future role of the tribe of Judah in God's redemptive plan. It also offers valuable lessons about finding contentment and fulfillment in God's love and provision, even amidst challenging circumstances.